I'm going to introduce no stranger to this room. He has been here several years to speak at our luncheons. We're very excited to have him here today. But Senator Steve Gooch was elected to the Georgia State Senate in 2010. Senator Gooch represents the 51st District, which includes Fannin, Union, Gilmer, Luncheon, White, Dawson, and parts of Pickett and Forsyth counties. Senator Gooch was elected as Majority Whip of the Senate Majority Caucus in 2014. Prior to serving as the Senate Majority Whip, Senator Gooch served as the Secretary of the Senate Majority Caucus and their Chair of the Senate Transportation Committee. Very active. We are very lucky. Senator Gooch serves as Vice Chairman of the Transportation Committee and Secretary of the Appropriations Committee. Additionally, he serves on the Finance and Regulated Industries and Utilities Committee and is an ex officio on the Assignments of Rules Committees. Senator Gooch graduated from North Georgia College and State University, where he earned a bachelor's degree in Business Administration and a master's degree in Public Administration. He currently serves as Executive Director of the Development Authority of Luncheon County and is former Georgia Department of Transportation Board member. Prior to being elected to the Georgia State Senate, he served as the sole Luncheon County Commissioner. I can only imagine what that was like. Senator Gooch and his wife Shannon have 3 children, Samuel, Seth, and Sawyer, and we're very excited to have him here today. So please welcome our senators.
Thank you all for having me today. It's been a pleasure being your senator for 10 years now. I guess you've been in office for 10 years, they call you the establishment. I always try to remind people that if you're getting things done, you're effective, then keep doing it. If you're not effective anymore, go home. But I continue to run every 2 years and ask you for your support. You pretty much in a huge way re-elected me last November. I got about almost 80% of the vote. Dawson County has always been very supportive of me. And I try to work hard to represent your values in Atlanta. Although I can't say that I guarantee you I'll always make you happy with my votes. There's about 200,000 people in my Senate district, and they're not all Republicans, they're not all conservatives, so occasionally we're going to miss a few votes. But for the most part, we try to get it right. We get a lot of feedback from you all throughout the year. That's important. Emails, phone calls, texts are very important. It helps keep people like myself and Will grounded so we know what's on your mind, what's in your hearts. And we try to represent you. We are your voice. So there's 2 buttons on our desk. You can either vote yes or no. And there's no maybes and no I'll get back to you later. You gotta get to vote, and hopefully you've done your homework, you know what the bills are, what they mean. If not, a lot of times I'll vote against them if I haven't had a chance to read them. But toward the end of session, this is a true story, they're flying through there so fast. A lot of amendments are made in the other chamber, both in the House and the Senate are guilty of this, and they combine bills together. And sometimes you really don't know what's in there. You don't trust the person that's presenting the bill. You better be real careful, because you're going to vote for something you won't know about until you get home, and you'll read about it in the AJC, and you're like, surely I didn't vote for that. Go back and look, and like, yes, you did. You missed it. So a lot of times I'll vote no. People say, why did you vote against that bill? And I'll look and I'll say, well, it came in at 11:45 or 11:55. I had literally 60 seconds to decide. Did I vote for this originally when it first came through, or what did the House add to it? And if I can't find it, and if it's a thick bill, I'll take the caution and vote against it. Most of the time we do our due diligence in advance, but occasionally those will happen. This has been a very unusual year for us. Coming after last year's pandemic, it was kind of an improvement from last year. Last year was terrible. All of you all that worked through the pandemic for the last 12 months, you're probably relieved that you're not wearing a mask in here today. Nobody in here is wearing a mask. There's still a lot of fear out there, and this disease is something we should all take very seriously. But I believe there's been a lot of progress made across our country with COVID. vaccine, and I think we've learned a lot about how to do better in cleaning and preparing and social distancing, washing our hands. Does anybody know of anyone that's had the flu this year?
I had.
I haven't heard of anybody have the flu. You're the first two people. So where did the flu go? You know, I think we do a lot of...
To me, it came to me.
Yeah, well, I mean, washing our hands. We wash our hands more now than we ever should. Probably years ago, we never thought about it. Thank goodness that we've educated ourselves on that. The education world really got flipped up on its top. Damon, you guys did a phenomenal job adapting and changing your methods and your ways to keep our kids in the classroom. I want to thank you for putting our kids back to school. In the very difficult time that you all went through, and your teachers deserve the credit. I could not be a school teacher, mainly because I know what kind of a student I was. We still have classrooms that are virtual. People are still at home learning. Clayton County went back to the virtual situation this morning. I heard on the news through the end of the school year. We've got to get kids back in school. We've got to get them back in the classroom. We've got to get people back to work. We've got to, for a lot of reasons. But thank goodness the vaccine's out there. If you haven't had it, I'd encourage you to consider it. I haven't taken it yet, but I did have the antibodies from last summer when I contracted the virus. I didn't even know that I had it, but I took the antibodies test and I got it. So, talk a little bit about some legislation that we passed this year. Did anybody keep up with anything in the news during session? What was the #1 topic you heard about? Election reform. Somebody talked about election reform in there. There were probably 50 or 60 bills that ran through the House and the Senate. A lot of talk on TV, a lot of talk on the internet. Don't believe all that stuff you heard. We are not as bad as the people in Atlanta made us out to be. They call us everything under the sun. My grandmother would be ashamed of me if it was true. But we passed a very comprehensive piece of legislation. Ended up being Senate Bill 202, which was the final bill that sort of accumulated all of the different ideas and thoughts that we had gathered throughout the process. So there was about a 93-page bill that passed the Senate and the House in the final days of session, which took just about all the oxygen in the building down there for the entire session. There's 50 different sections in the bill. Now, if you believe what you hear on TV or read in the social media, then you were probably thinking, why would they pass such ridiculous legislation? If you read the bill, it'll take you a while, but if you read the bill from top to bottom, I believe you will agree that this piece of legislation does not suppress the voters' rights in Georgia. We do not want to suppress anybody's right or access to the ballot box. What we achieved, and I think you will agree with us in the end, is we made it more accessible, more transparent, and more reliable. The bill does that, in my opinion. It's a long bill, but it goes into a lot of different sections of the code. And for some, whatever reason, over the last 20 or 30 years, we've gotten lax and we've relaxed our laws in Georgia that allow for some of these things to happen. A lot of comments have been made about the elections were stolen in November. This bill doesn't talk about November. This bill talks about the future, and that's what we wanted to do. So when you go to vote this next year, you won't see a lot of change in what you saw in Dawsonville last year. Some of the areas of the state may, in DeKalb and Fulton, there's some things in the bill that are going to require them to make some changes. The water issue was one of the things being able to vote because we wouldn't allow them to drink water. But that's not true. We just didn't want special interest groups to show up at the election day at the polls or at the precincts, handing out water and encouraging people to vote for their particular candidate. Whether you're Republican or Democrat, you don't want that interference. There's a law that says within 150 feet of a voter precinct, you're not allowed to campaign. So if you want to have water, you can take water. If the elections office wants to provide water, they can do that. They can provide coolers, they can have water fountains just like you do back here in this room. If this were a voting precinct today, that water fountain would be allowed to be in this building. you would be able to get as much water out of it as you wish. What we wouldn't allow is for a group of people from the outside coming in with yellow shirts on with certain names of groups saying, here, we want you to have this free water, but we want you to vote for so-and-so for president or state rep. So simple common sense changes like that were put in this bill. I think if you read it, you'll agree with me. I went to Home Depot. I told this story last week. I went to Home Depot week before last to buy 6 bags of concrete. If you go to Home Depot, you tell the person at the restaurant you want 6 bags of concrete, they'll charge you. You walk out and you load it under the porch, the portico out front. When I walked outside with my receipt, the guy had charged me for 60-pound bags. I wanted 80-pound bags. I didn't want to load 60 because I would have to have more than 6. So I turned around, went back in, and I said, I need to change this to an 80-pound bag mix. He said, well, you'll have to go down to the returns section. So I walked down to the other end of the store. This is in Delaniga's store. Handed the lady the receipt and said, I just paid for this up front. Didn't even load it, but I wanted to swap it for 80-pound bags instead of 60. She said, not a problem. It's a debit card, so it won't show back up on your account for 3 days. I'll just give you a gift card. I'm like, whatever. Suits me. She said, I need to see your ID. I said, okay. So I pulled out my driver's license. She said, no, I'm sorry, I got to do this, but it's costly. I said, why do you need to see my driver's license? She said, we want to make sure you are who you say you are. I said, no, I know who you are now. She was from White County. She said, listen, I want to tell you how much I'm grateful and thankful that y'all are doing this in Atlanta. She said, this needed to be done. I said, well, no problem. We're listening to the people that we represent. She gave me the gift card. I ran back down to the other end of the store and said, here's the gift card. I want to buy 6 pounds of 80-pound saccharin. He said, no problem. He said, I need to see your photo ID. I just showed the lady down in the hall. I'm sorry, but we got to make sure that you are who's on the card. So I wish you worked for the elections office. So I had to show my license twice. I said, what if I didn't have a driver's license? What would we be doing right here? He didn't have an answer for that. So y'all know where I'm going with that. There's no reason you can't produce a photo ID in order to go vote. When you vote in person, you have to show it. When you vote early, you have to show it. So when you get an absentee ballot, you ought to have to provide some kind of proof that you are who you are, say you are. If you're Dan Pashon or Gary Pashon, prove it. When I grew up as a kid in Delania, north of Delania, in Yehula voting precincts where I lived, the lady that used to change my diapers ended up running the voting precinct up there. When I turned 18, I walked in. She said, hey, Steve, how are you doing? I said, I'm doing great, Frankie. She was like, you want to vote? I said, yes, ma'am. She said, I need to see your photo ID. I said, Frankie, you used to change my diapers. You know, I'm sorry, that's the law. That's no problem. Why, how does that offend anyone? How does that suppress the vote? It doesn't. And if you don't have a driver's license, don't worry. The Board of Elections will give you an ID for free. You go by any Board of Elections office in the state of Georgia, they'll take a picture of you up against the wall. It's better than your profile picture at the jail. They'll give you a card that looks like a weapons carry, a license for your weapons carry. It just says government ID, it's government issued. You can take it and vote with it. It proves that you are who you say you are and that you live in Dawsonville or wherever you live. Those are the kinds of things in this bill. So I would challenge you, the same way I have other groups, if you find anything in that 93-page document that keeps you from voting or suppresses the vote, you point it out to me and I'll buy your lunch anywhere in Dawson County. So, is that a deal? Yeah. All right, good. I'm not going to move on. I'm not going to talk much more about that. The budget, every year we pass a budget depending on our economy and our revenue forecast from the governor. This year's forecast was much better than last year's. If y'all recall, we had to trim the budget about 10% initially, and then we pulled back on that and ended up with a 3 or 4% reduction. We restored just about all of those cuts this year. Our budget has grown. The economy is doing well. We're hitting on all 8 cylinders in the budget that the governor signed this week on Monday. $27.2 billion. It's the largest state budget in the history of the state. And that's because of all the business people like you in this room that are hiring people, putting people to work, and obviously us consumers buying our goods here. Some of the legislation that was passed year before last and last year helped for that. The Marketplace Facilitator Bill helps to collect sales tax when you buy goods online. A lot of companies were shipping things here into Georgia and they weren't collecting the sales tax, while other businesses that are in Georgia, like people here in Dawson County, you collect the sales tax in your store. You have brick and mortar stores. You're paying all those taxes. You're paying all your employees here locally. So that puts you at a disadvantage. And so the Marketplace Facilitator Law went into effect last year, and man, it made a huge impact because it collected taxes that were already due the government, but those people just weren't sending them out. So that enabled us to be able to collect what was owed to the state, and it wasn't an undue disadvantage to the current businesses here in Georgia, especially here at home. So the budget's doing well. We're seeing a lot of new growth in every economy, in every part of the economy, in every sector. The problem, however, is the availability of labor. We have a huge labor shortage in Georgia and across this country, and a lot of it was created by the federal government. Last year's pandemic forced a lot of our businesses to shut down, schools shut down, sent parents home, sent kids home, and so people were drawing unemployment, and rightly so. That's why we pay unemployment insurance benefits. It comes out of our checks every 2 weeks. The federal government, however, extended that on into perpetuity almost, and we've added more and more benefits to that. We increased the benefits by $300 a week. Today, if you're drawing unemployment, you're drawing about $16 an hour. The problem is all these jobs are back. People just don't want to go back to work unless they're making that or more. So there's an incentive by the federal government to sit at home. And every business that I've talked to, y'all may know something different. Every business I've talked to, they're saying we have jobs available, we just can't find people to come back to work. A lady that owns a local restaurant in Dahlonega told me this week, for the last 12 months, she's had 2 job applications turned in. In 12 months, she had 2 applications. We can't keep paying people to sit at home. We've got to get people back to work, back producing in the economy. And I think that's about to change. In fact, I sent a letter to Governor Kemp this week encouraging him to do what some of the other governors have done in other states. You've seen Alabama, Florida, South Carolina, and Montana, and some others. Those governors came out last week and this week and said, we're cutting it off at the end of June 12th, what have you. We're going to eliminate the extended benefits. And I believe Governor Kemp made the same announcement today. And by mid-June, those extra unemployment benefits will terminate. That doesn't eliminate unemployment for people who lose their job currently. That's just the extra money that was put in last year because of the pandemic. We've got to get people back to work. We're seeing huge inflation already. We're seeing a shortage of inventory. The supply chain has been disrupted. Just about every company you talk to is having trouble getting their goods to their customers, and we're seeing that in the work that I do as well. I do work in the environmental service area, and we can't buy PVC pipe. We've had it on order for weeks, and now we're told it could be another 3 to 4 weeks before we can get it. So our projects are on hold until we can get that. We're hearing that same story across the board.
Is it a production issue or transportation?
It's availability of workforce. We can't, a lot of companies that have 3 shifts, manufacturers, for example, are not able to keep 3 shifts running because the workforce isn't there. Local business in Dahlonega, Coil Bearings, they can't provide the product to Toyota and Ford and some of the other manufacturers for the needle bearings that they make, just because they can't get people to work. Government sector is impacted as well. The sheriff of Luncheon County has about 100 people under his command. He has 14 vacancies right now in his department. Cannot find people to hire for being a deputy sheriff and working in the jail. We're not talking about minimum wage jobs. We're talking about decent paid positions. Young people coming out of school making $15, $20 an hour. That's a good paying job in North Georgia. And we just can't find people to come back to work. So I think that's about to change. Talk a little bit about transportation. I spend a lot of my time dealing with transportation in the policy area and also in the budgeting side of that. We were able to add about $200 million into the budget this year because of the federal funds that are coming down. The state of Georgia is going to get $4.7 billion in federal stimulus money through what's called ARPA. That's the American Prosperity Act. And I think your local school board is going to get several million. Your city and county governments are going to get it as well. That money is going to be spent hopefully wisely. It's going to be put in 3 or 4 buckets. One bucket will be in transportation, and the other bucket will be in broadband deployment. So we're seeing a lot of money being spent around the state and rural areas as well. Here in Dawson County, there's several projects going on. I'll go over that real quick, and then I'm going to sit down and let Will come up and clean up where I left off. Y'all probably know about I call it the figure 8, the 2 roundabouts over at Dawson Forest and Highway 9. Be patient. That project is due to be completed probably around April of next year. The cost of that project is $4.4 million, but it's going to make a big impact. It's going to make a difference. The actual construction will be completed by November of this year, but they'll have landscaping and some other things. They'll have to do some what's called final topping. That's just basically the landscape dressing and trees and the maintenance through the spring. So by the spring of next year, you won't see barrels or any kind of construction material over there. But that is going to be a big improvement. There's going to be some bridge replacements. State Route 136 at the river, which is over by the lake. That is let June 18th. When I say let, that means it'll be put out for contract on June the 18th of this year. That project cost is $7.6 million. Another bridge replacement, State Route 183 at Cochrane Creek, is going to be $2.8 million. That'll be let next April of 22. And then State Route 136 at Toto Creek will be a bridge replacement. That won't start until 2024, so that's a couple of years away. But the construction cost of that's $3.75 million. Some other projects, roundabouts at State Route 53 and Dawson Forest Road. That's a partnership with your local county, the commissioners here. Thank you for that. You'll get some local grant money from the state for that. Resurfacing on State Route 136 from the Dawson-Pickens line to the intersection of 183. That project length is 6.4 miles. That's set to be let in 2023 fiscal year, which is a year and a half away. The cost of that's $2.3 million. Resurfacing on State Route 52 from the Gilmer-Dawson line to the 184 roundabout, which is a new roundabout we just finished. That's 4.24 miles. That'll be let next year. The project cost is $1.6 million. And there's several other safety projects and improvements for striping and signs and so forth. So we are bringing money home to Dawson County for your highways, and that's really what a lot of people fuss about is potholes and soft shoulders and so forth and so on. So we worked on that funding formula back in 2015. We talked about that here before. Year after year, we continue to bring more and more money back to help you on your local roads. So I'm going to stop now and let me brag on Will Wade sort of as an introduction for Will, because he's a freshman. We get to pick on freshmen a little bit. Normally a freshman goes to a camp and they're told to keep their mouth shut and sit in the back row. Don't say anything unless you're asked to. That's what I'm told is what happens.
That is very accurate.
And so there's what? How many freshmen were there? 16 or 20?
15, yeah.
So there's a room full of freshmen down there. They all think they know everything. Will comes in as a different perspective. His background in banking and business, and of course being on the local school board for about 15 years, gives him a unique experience and perspective. So I had a bill this year, Senate Bill 47. It was dealing with special needs scholarships for kids who have some different needs that the local schools typically can handle, but some don't do so well. It depends on the situation. This bill would allow parents to make the decision if they don't think their child is getting the proper education at their local school, they should be able to move their kid to a private school of their choosing, whatever meets their child's needs. And this bill would allow them to take some of that state funding with them, what we call FTE, full-time equivalent. So that's roughly $6,000 to $7,000 of state funding that would follow the child. Just like if you took your child out of the school today and moved to Forsyth County Public Schools, that FTE money would go to Forsyth County Public Schools. So some people don't like that because they think you're trying to approach full-time vouchers for private schools. That's not the intent. This bill was limited to kids under what's called a 504, so federal designation. So it's not an easy bill to pass. The Democrats typically always vote against it, and some of our Republicans weren't real comfortable with it because they had some feedback from, back home. Will's experience on the school board made him the perfect candidate to carry this bill in the House. We used him a little bit. Used and abused. But, so we got the bill out of the Senate. It takes 29 votes to pass the bill in the Senate. I think it passed with 30 or 31, 32. I don't know if it was 32, 33 actually. We have 34 Republicans. We had 2 no votes. So it goes over to the committee in the House, and we work it hard. Will gets involved. He's agreed to carry the bill. And several people said, no, why are you carrying this bill? And he explains it very well. He articulated the bill better than I did because he understands education far more than I do. So he got in the well of the House. He presented this bill, and everybody was mouth dropped because they said, Will Wade came from the school. This was the president of the School Board Association a couple of years ago, right?
Yes, sir.
And Damon's probably beating the crap out of him over the phone and saying, you can't do this. He did it, and it passed by 91 votes, which is exactly the number of votes that it needs to get out of the House. So he was a rock star. He's gotten all the credit for passing the bill, and it was my legislation. He got a phone call from Eric Erickson. Y'all know who Eric Erickson is? And then the other day, he told me that Jeb Bush even called him. So y'all have a rock star in the House. He's doing a great job representing you, and so y'all give him a big round.
I will say this, I did get to modify what we call amendment in committee of that bill. Because of my experience in the school system, just to kind of finish that up, we were able to, kind of find a way to bridge the gap between those that were 100% adamant for that need versus those that had extreme concerns. And as a school board member, I had concerns, and Steve and I talked about those. And what I like about our ability to work together in the Senate and House is we were able to have very, very detailed conversation and respect each other's position. And so we started looking at who's using this scholarship in the state. How long has it been around? It's been around for 14 years. And 5,243 students were using this scholarship over 14 years. There's some of the most extreme special ed situations in our state. And my wife happens to be a special ed director in the middle school. I have a sister-in-law who's been in special ed her entire 25 years of education. And so I had some understanding from folks that are on the ground as to, there are situations in which in some communities in our state, a lot of times that happen to be in urban settings are not meeting the needs of some of those students. There are only, in the District 9 that I represent, there are only 7 students that were utilizing the scholarship for 14 years. And I think in your Senate district, it was like less than 30. So it wasn't something that was going to be impacting the district that I represent. And so I wasn't going to just be an automatic, okay, the easiest thing for me to do no. So sorry, Steve. But I also said nobody's touched this legislation in 14 years to look at what can we do to improve it. So I made a decision to say, okay, Steve, I'll work with you. I've got some ideas on how we can kind of narrow that list to focus those students at 504s with specific, medical disabilities that a medical doctor has been treating. The school system has gone through an IEP process where they are aware of the student's need, or they're in the 504, and there's been an attempt and evidence that that need has not been met. So it's not just an automatic, right? They've got to be in the school for at least a year. That they go through a process. So it gets into the weeds. And what's funny is because I'm a community banker and a former school board member, I like to get in the weeds. I like to figure out what is the details that we need to find. It's not a 4-letter word, but people treat it that way, which is compromise, right? You've got to make a decision. So I looked at it from, this is good state policy, and it gets me at the table. So next year, when I drop a bill to make a few more changes that we didn't have time this year, Steve's going to go carry it to the house, the Senate. And then Jeb Bush will call him and tell him that. Right, that's how it works.
That worked good.
But, so this is my first time to present as your representative to this chamber. So first, I want to thank the chamber for what you do in the community and just how you guys have been resilient over the last several, months and especially this last year. And, there's a lot of folks in this room that I can either thank or my wife might criticize for putting me in this position by voting for me and supporting me in the campaign. Because it was a weird time to campaign last year. And as a person who campaigned for a local office, it was one thing, but campaigning in a pandemic was definitely a different experience. And so I got to borrow this from Steve. So this is Steve's joke, but it's actually a true statement. So I want to borrow it. I remember getting to the State House in that first week after we got the, sit down, shut up, listen, and you'll learn speech as a freshman. I look up at the rotunda and I'm like, man, how did I get here? How did I get through that campaign? There were 6 candidates. It was crazy. What am I doing here? You're thinking, I don't know everything, but you want to contribute, right? You want to be effective. And then that's great, and you're working hard, and you're dealing with issues, and you're taking phone calls about things you never thought you would get a phone call about. And you're really trying to serve, and you're trying to take care of people. And then you get in the meat of some craziness. That last couple of weeks is crazy. I mean, I've never been through that type of experience before. And I think we had 2 board meetings while I was on the school board that went to midnight, but and mostly because Roger's late. If he was here, I'd tell him the same thing. Roger and I would go back and forth with each other as almost like an adopted uncle he was for me. But 2 weeks before we get finished, I start looking around and I'm like, all right, I know how I got here. How did that person get here? You know what I mean? I'm telling you. And so I would say that, we made some major, headlines, obviously, national attention on the elections bill, but it's good policy. It's not going to infringe upon somebody's right to vote. And I'm like Steve, you know what? If he'll buy you lunch, I'll buy you dinner. If you can tell me that this is going to, impact your ability to vote and suppress your vote in this state, it's not. The other thing we did pass a tax cut, $140 million, which is nothing to sneeze at. I think that's important for us to look at. I've been looking at the revenue numbers coming in. I mean, April over April, 52% increase. But again, you got to remember last April was the lowest revenue year, but we're still up about 13% or so year to date. That's good. That means that we've got a good, healthy economy. He already touched on the fact that we've got job, displacement right now due to the federal stimulus, and it kind of reminds me that we at the local level have dealt with this, and we generally kind of nip it in the bud more quickly. But we are fighting what I think is not necessarily a Republican versus Democrat thing. It's more of a, what is the proper amount of government assistance and what's moderate versus what is a belief in a long-term government independence, like programs that are designed to keep people reliant on that as a source. And, we've got folks in this room that are meeting needs for people when they're in that transitional situation and have had a life event. I mean, I'm excited to see the place. It's a great organization. I think they're going to enhance what Rick Rack does. That can be taken care of, and that is a philanthropic way to address needs, right? At the closest point. And it's not an incentive, it is here's a hand up, right? We're going to help you, but you're going to become self-reliant again. And I believe that's what our job as your representatives, whether in the Senate or in the House, is to make sure we're championing that type of policy. The other thing I want to tell you, as a freshman, there it is hazing. I'm like, okay, I remember freshman year in high school, it was awful. Freshman year of college, you go through some hazing there too. That first job, and you get to be a freshman in the employment world, and then I get to go be a freshman again. So the best thing about next January is okay, I've got a year behind me, so maybe the hazing will subside some. But you do get a few folks that try to trick you in that first couple of weeks. So I had a guy come up and he tried to get me a piece of legislation. And I'm a former commercial lender in my career. I've been doing that a long time, and so I read what's put in front of me. So I read the bill. I know, novel idea. And I'm like, all right, this guy says he's a Republican. He gave me a bill. It was not Republican. I don't even know what it was. It was crazy. It was a joke. It was not something that was real. And they were like, hey, we'll let you carry this, and we'll let you go speak in the committee chair. But, you know, we only have, you got 12 hours. You got to get this done. In the morning, you got a meeting, so we want you to present. And like, I was going, and I'm like, there's no way I can put my name on this. Like, my mama would be upset with me. Like, and so I was like, okay, this has got to be a joke. So they kind of kept the game going for a while, and finally, I got the speaker. I didn't get to do the speaker, but I met with his chief of staff, and Spiro was doing his best to just keep this is serious. This is a bipartisan effort. We believe in wisdom, justice, and moderation in this state. This is a very modern approach. I'm like, this isn't any of those things. I'm not doing this. I'm like, fine, don't give me a committee. I'm done. I'm not doing it. And then they all busted out laughing. And so they were like, well, you passed the test. I'm like, great. I said, I don't want any more of those because I spent way too long reading something that was a waste of my time and my constituents. Don't do that to my constituents. So, but we also had the opportunity to take on a few other issues. One of which that is not really something that we deal with a lot of here, but it could have the potential to impact us, and that is the citizen's arrest legislation. That was a unanimous vote in the House. I think it was unanimous in the Senate. There was one no vote. But it basically updated a law that was passed in the Civil War era. And, that's one of those things where it doesn't take your right to defend yourself away, but it puts in statute that we can't have vigilante justice. It's just we're not that kind of people, right? And that was one of those things that didn't really get a lot of attention while we were discussing it, but there was some really good bipartisan discussion. And I come from a generation in which the discussion of racism and where we've gotten as a nation is disappointing, because all of the things that I heard my parents tell me that they experienced through the eyes of their parents, who remember coming out of the Depression and then the Civil Rights Movement, and it's like, did we forget all of the progress that we've made to understand that we're all created equally in the sight of God, that we're supposed to love one another and try to treat each other like I could care less what color skin you are. I don't even have that in my brain. But yet there are people that are pushing that as a way to continue to divide us. But the actual people that are elected in this state had no issue addressing that head on and passing policy that just said, we're not going to allow any kind of vigilante. It doesn't matter what the color of skin is. You just can't go shoot somebody because you think that they, are a criminal. That's why we have the police force. That's why we have the rule of law. And it doesn't get talked about much, and I wanted to mention it. And it doesn't impact our area, right? That's not something that we've dealt with here locally, but you never know what could happen in the future. So that was an interesting piece of legislation. And I guess the last thing I'll say, and then we can open up for a couple of questions. I'll brag on Steve in this regard, and it's hard to do because there is this weird House versus Senate. I don't get that. I'm kind of a team guy. I played a lot of team sports, so I don't really like having the division. I know they're the upper chamber, they're the smaller. They're the place that's supposed to bring reason, and the House is supposed to be the.
Keep thinking that way.
But when we were working on legislation, you do have to have somebody that you can trust, and I think that Steve and I have a mutual trust for each other. And really, it has less to do about our personal friendship and relationship. It has more to do with, we see it as the responsibility to serve you, whether it's the business community, whether it's you as an individual, or parent, or grandparent. We don't need to have that personality conflict and say, well, I'm not going to let the senator get the credit, or hey, this person is a lunatic and they're not going to be involved. I mean, there's some of that down there, which I guess that's just the way the world is. But you're blessed, I think, to have 2 representatives that are not going to allow ourselves to be caught up in that. And Senator Gooch was able to do that, and I actually, I think he took a razzing from some of his colleagues, like, you're going to let a freshman carry that bill? Like, are you crazy? What he didn't tell you is we had 81 votes going into my presentation on the floor the day that we passed that legislation. And so I had 2 options. All right, vote it down, see where people are, and we can bring it back up a couple days later. Or if it's, if it, as they say, if it crashes and burns and you don't get anywhere close to that, then the legislation's dead, and Steve says, I'm going to give Will another bill, right? But we were able to, work together and communicate on behalf of that policy. And I get to be, in my freshman year, I was the only legislator that carried the only bill that passed by 91 votes. And that to me is like, that means that I met that hard middle, if that makes sense. And it really wasn't about me, it was about the fact that it's a tough issue, and tough issues are tight votes. And that's where you really can figure out, okay, am I willing to have really deep conversations with people I care about, like Dr. Gibbs, and get his insight. But Dr. Gibbs also gave me good insight to say, I like the additions that you make. I understand why you're presenting it. I may not agree with it philosophically for this reason or this reason, but what you did has merit. That's how we're supposed to lead on issues. So with that, come on up and we'll ask a couple of you how about that?
Yeah, that's okay.
Awesome. Oh, you go.
All right, does anyone have any questions?
I was just wondering, it's probably for Senator Gooch, any update on the Colonial Pipeline problem?
Yep. Are there any hackers in the room? I'm going to plug UNG for a minute. We got the #1 university in Georgia for the Coach Breaker Challenge. They won again this year. So this is a real big issue. It's a big challenge, not just for, Colonial Pipeline, but for every industry, every banker, everybody in this room has, how many passwords do you have either in your memory, which I'm losing quickly, or somewhere on your personal relation, your possession, you have all these passwords. These kids that are coming through schools and colleges and all are brilliant. And this hacking happens to be from a Russian gang, but it's going to continue to happen. So we're going to have to get smarter and better and fast too, because they're going to come after our power grids, they're going to come after our personal bank accounts, which they're already trying to hack into as we sit here today. I get alerts all the time. So, but to answer the question, Colonial is back on the up and moving again. They're moving fuel, but it's going to take a few days to catch up. So everybody ran out to the pumps and filled up. Some of the craziest stuff in the world you've seen on Facebook. People putting gasoline in tubs, plastic bags. Don't try that. It's not a good idea. So I'm glad that we have, the reserves that we have, but it's been challenging. We can't rely strictly on combustible engines, but we can't rely strictly on batteries either. We're going to have to continue to keep a good balanced approach in our energy portfolios. And we do that here in Georgia. We have nuclear, natural gas, and of course, a little bit of solar, but very little wind power. But we've got to continue to make it better. But thanks to the UNG folks for what they're doing, because they're preparing our young people for that opportunity and that challenge. That's right.
Any other questions?
That was easy.
Well, I'll ask one more then. The election bill, which I happen to agree wholeheartedly with, has there been any more word on a legal challenge to that?
There's 3 or 4 lawsuits pending. We'll just let the courts go through their process. I love due process as long as it's fair. If we did something that's not legal, we can fix it next year. But if it becomes a political issue in the court system, then we've got a flawed court system. So, yes, sir.
Was the intent on the drop boxes to basically eliminate their effectiveness?
Well, how many drop boxes were there in Georgia before last year? Anybody know? 0. Last year was the first year we ever used the drop box, and it's because of the health care crisis. They didn't want people to have to walk into a building like this and interact with humans, so they left the box outside. That wasn't even codified in state law until SB 202 passed. So when people say you took away drop boxes, well, no, we didn't. We actually created drop boxes in this law, because now they're actually required to be put out in counties. Before this year, they weren't allowed. Except for that secretary.
So you don't really have much access.
No, but you want them protected as well. So now they have to be surveillance monitors on them to where somebody can watch them. Now, you may say, well, the drop boxes outside were under surveillance. There was a camera on them, but nobody was watching them. And they had a 24-hour loop or a 3-day loop or whatever. So if something was done to them last week, you would not be able to go back and look at those tapes. Now they're under lock and key and they can be secured.
Yeah, we heard testimony from some states that had situations where they did have drop boxes where, people were pouring in, water and it would just ruin everything or something. I mean, there was even a place where they were.
And remember,
So there's always risk with whatever you do.
there were drop boxes in Georgia before last year.
Yeah.
I'm wrong. It's the U.S. mailbox. Everybody has one, right? That's your drop box too. So put the 5-cent stamp on there and you mail that absentee ballot application. I saw 2 other hands.
Yeah, there's,
Yes, ma'am.
And I've contacted Will about this question, and I haven't read 202. But I wondered if, I just learned that that if you vote absentee, that is public knowledge. So these people can gain, lists of who voted absentee. I personally feel that should have been part of the bill. I didn't know if it ever was or not.
Now, when you send your absentee ballot back to the Board of Elections office, it's in an envelope, inside of an envelope.
Yeah,
Y'all correct me if I'm wrong,
that's right.
because I've never done it. I always vote in person. But that envelope gets opened, but somebody has to count your absentee ballot, obviously. So I guess that person who opened the envelope would see how that person voted, but it doesn't have your name on it. So they take the envelope out of the envelope, put it in a different stack.
That's not my question.
yeah, what she's talking about is, so what we did to address her concern had to do with it's public record of you being a voter.
Not how you vote.
Yeah.
It's that you voted
That you voted absentee.
Oh, yeah, that's always.
And that did not change. What we did change with, which I heard a lot of complaints that was kind of interrelated with your specific concern, and that was all of the third-party groups that were mailing, to encourage you to vote absentee because they kind of knew you voted absentee, so they wanted you to do it the next election. What we changed is now those groups have to make it abundantly clear that they are not affiliated with your local Board of Elections office, they're not affiliated with the state elections office, that they're a third-party group, and they have to label what group they are. So if it's, Democratic Party, Republican Party, if it's Will Wade's campaign, it has to be completely prevalent that that's who's doing it. But because of our current, public voting is, a right, and campaigns on all sides want to know who are active voters, the fact of you voting is still a public thing, and we could not make that change. Basically, they said it was unconstitutional. We have no constitutional amendment to change those type of things from a public disclosure. But what we did is say, okay, we're going to try to limit these third-party groups from inundating people, because it got into the point where folks were like, I don't even know that. Why am I still getting all these things? And then how many applications do I need? And there's some people that were worried and they wanted to make sure they could vote, and you guys got multiple people.
Oh, yeah.
On your cell phone, if I was.
Well, the texting, the technology is an amazing thing. So once you vote, your name actually gets submitted, put in the database. And so these candidates and these consultants, they were getting updates every day on who voted the day before, so they would purge the list daily. And then they would send everybody else a text. So as you approach election day, like June 5th or January 5th runoff, I didn't vote until the day of the election. I was getting text after text, and the reason was they knew I hadn't voted yet. If I'd have voted early, they would have left me alone. So I'm thinking maybe I need to go vote on the first day of early voting, so I'm not hammered by all that sense of a lot of time, multiple times, and it does create a sense of insecurity. Did my ballot make it back in? So you might have the tendency to send it back in just to be on the safe side. So I think we've cleaned a lot of that up. Going forward, you'll know who sent that to you. And nobody got a ballot unless you literally signed for it. And now the signature is no longer the requirement. Now you have to have a photo ID requirement.
Or your ID number, or in that case, replaced for you to go to the Board of Elections. The other piece is there were some concerns just about, the United States Postal Service they were inundated, obviously, because of the situation. They were concerned about the number of absentee ballots that were applied for and mailed out locally just a few days before the election, which was in compliance with law, but 50% of the people that received the absentee ballot back from their local Board of Elections office within 3 days of the election their vote was not, they didn't get it processed and mailed back. Because I don't know how many in Dawson County it was, but it was several that there was ballots coming in up to a week or two and probably even longer of
We had one ballot from the November election that took 16 weeks.
So,
And it disappeared. The post office, those ballots are yellow. You can't miss it.
No, you
It
can't.
just showed up in our mail. The post office would not tell us where it came from.
yeah, and we're not picking on people working in the post office. There was volume, there was choke points, there were all kinds of issues that, the pandemic highlighted in every section of our society, weakness. Businesses had to retool. I think this election bill is a way for us to respond to and retool. And we're going to go through some elections and we're going to figure out what works, what doesn't, and then that's what we're down there for. We can make additional changes. And they've had election laws every couple of years where they've made tweaks.
I've worked for 4 secretaries of state in the 20 years I've been on election board. We have always been behind in going to the legislature and correcting the election law. It's just not on anybody's best interest to pursue it. And yet it did us like a storm last year.
I think the mayor had his hand up. Mayor, somebody back there has a question? One more somewhere. Who else has a question?
Anybody? All right. Thank you for having us.
Yes, no, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much for coming today. I'm sorry we didn't have a nice bio on Will. I apologize I didn't give you that. Luckily, we all know him, and that's what's so awesome about having him serve as our representative is both of these guys are so very approachable. I mean, if I've been somewhere, I wouldn't know what to think if I didn't have, I appreciate your teamwork together and everything that you do for us. And we will continue as a chamber to work with you guys to make Dawson County the best it can possibly be. So thank you all for coming. Let us know if you